So the reason we're here today is at the end of the day, for all of those of us who are working to secure our organization, life isn't getting any easier. Every time you invest in a new technology, the environment changes, it becomes more complex. We're dealing with a lot of challenging environments. And as much as technology unleashes some great opportunity, it always comes with some challenges in terms of how it might negatively impact the business if we don't understand the risks and take the right security steps to manage that. So we're constantly going through this. Okay, how is our threat landscape changing? Do we understand, and what actions can we take to mitigate the risks? So it really comes down to a continuous evaluation of our security posture almost daily, and also holistically to avoid damages that can come from tarnished brand, a broken trust with customers, and then the ultimate financial consequences. So why we're here today is to talk about specifically an area within this around digital identities and the management of digital risk profiles and their emerging importance in your organization. So we are going to talk first about defining your security posture and a real comprehension of the risks, resources, and the tolerance associated with that. How digital transformation is impacting your security landscape today. And then moving on to using digital risk profiles and assessments to manage the risk that they present within the organization. And then finally, just around the strategies in managing that digital risk in a meaningful time to value. The goal in going through this is, at the end of the day, we would like to leave with everybody the kind of that theme and the appreciation of the impact of digital transformation in today's world, the aspect of the human factor in that, and digital identities and their importance in that from a security landscape perspective, and managing that. So I'm going to introduce some of the folks who have joined me today. So as I mentioned, my name's Anne-Marie Moore. I am Chief Operating Officer here at Media Sonar Technologies. I'm joined by my colleague, Rob Murray, Senior Product Manager. And then we're also joined by a great friend and colleague from iThreat, Ashley. And so Ashley Brady, I'd love it if you could just give a bit of a quick intro related to yourself and iThreat.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. I'm Ashley Brady. I'm the Senior Manager of Investigations here at iThreat. iThreat is a threat intelligence company. We work with clients to establish monitoring programs for their important assets. And when I say threat intelligence, it kind of runs the gamut. We do anything and monitor for any asset that is important to our clients, which can range from intellectual property, corporate facilities, to online exposure of executives. So there's very few things we can't monitor for, and it definitely keeps our business interesting every single day. So thank you, Media Sonar, for having us here today.
No, we're delighted to have you. So Rob, let's talk a little bit about you.
Sure. I can talk about me. So hi, everyone. Rob Murray, as Anne-Marie had said, Senior Product Manager. Obviously, that's just a label. I won't describe what a product manager does. I'll give you a little bit about me, as it's a little bit more practical. So been in security about 15 years. I've worn a lot of different hats, whether that be leading digital security products, doing physical close protection details, or physical and digital intelligence operations. So I combine those experiences with the goal of uniting the conceptual, academic, and security when it comes to web intelligence to the practical or tactical day-to-day applications or limitations to our craft, and try to guide products towards the right solutions for the right times in emergent situations. So that's what I do here.
Oh, thank you. So as you can tell, the joining forces between Media Sonar and iThreat, we think it was a great thing to do in terms of this particular topic. iThreat brings that expertise and competency in the digital investigations, and very importantly, they're very versed on the challenges of working with the internet data set. Media Sonar, as a software company, works with it every day related to the data aggregation, the ability to automate web intelligence through a threat and security lens. So having the two together to kind of talk about this topic is pretty exciting for us. It goes without saying, the threat landscape is expanding. It's top of mind. The fear is real. We're all worried about it, and many of us feel like we're not doing enough. And it goes without saying that, in today's world, when it comes to compromise and breaches, it's not a question of if, It is more of a question of when and what is that impact. And digital transformation plays a significant role in this. But it's not all bad news, because budgets and investments are changing. It's happening. So the investment is either here for you or it's coming. One of the things that we do at Media Sonar is our research team is constantly conducting surveys just to get a pulse on what's happening in the security industry. If you look on the right-hand side of this chart, this is a very recent one that we did, and it does substantiate the belief that the dollars are there. It's very encouraging that most people feel that within the next 12 months, either their budget has increased or it's going to increase over the course of the next year. So budgets are there. But then, so that's the good news. We know the security risks are there. We're worried about it, but there is more attention being spent to it. So let's shift the gears a little bit more then to what that means for your security posture, or how you approach your security management practice. This is probably very known information for everybody on joining this call. But I think one of the telling things that is certainly happening when it comes to assessing your security investments is security, management of privacy, what you have in terms of certifications, what investments you've made related to kind of compliance and due diligence is increasingly becoming a pay to play with your customers, working with your suppliers, working with other vendors. And so there is an opportunity loss factor in terms of your security posture assessment. That's really important. The flip side of that is, in doing so, it becomes a selling point. So it becomes a door opener, right? You've got your admission ticket in terms of conducting business. And that is becoming a required norm related to being able to have the opportunity to close business with target customers. So you have those two factors of that. And then you balance that also against what's my organization's appetite. What is my risk appetite? Because I mentioned on the previous slide, it's not a question of if, it is going to be a question of when and what the impact is. So you have to balance that opportunity loss, the opportunity gain with what's my risk appetite, and very much then that kind of guides, okay, we've got these dollars to spend, where do we want to spend them based on what we see as that loss gain and appetite. And then fundamentally, ultimately, it's a true and educated and informed appreciation of what that's going to mean to your bottom line. So that's kind of where I see security posture assessments in the organization. And I think for today, as we're going through this, the burning question is, are we prioritizing the right cracks, or do we understand what those right cracks are within our what I would describe our threat landscape, and does our acceptable risk need to be reevaluated? And I think that's almost a daily thing, particularly now if we move on to digital transformation and what digital transformation does to your security landscape. So when you think of digital transformation, there's obviously positive gains, and you see that on the left-hand side. But if you look at some of those kind of key kind of elements of what digital transformation has meant to the enterprise over the last decades, there are definitely possible cracks in the shield, blind spots, vulnerabilities that are introduced. No longer is your data, your information, your enterprise protected by the four walls, the secure server room kind of concept. It's a whole different world, and everything is conducted, quote unquote, through the internet. The rush to build new systems caused by the pandemic over this past two years is an extreme example of digital transformations. Many organizations were forced to invest in technologies, not with the deadline of months or years, like within days, in order to continue to conduct business. And it would probably not be a stretch to suggest that in many of those instances, the cybersecurity aspects of that were a bit of an afterthought related to implementation, and some maybe still have not necessarily been fully addressed, which poses significant risk to the organization, particularly over the long term. And so as your infrastructure becomes and grows more complex, it's really hard to wrap your arms around that expanding attack surface. Read an interesting stat the other day that, and it was just last year, surveying CISOs, CIOs, and CPOs, and 93% of the companies surveyed that experienced a breach did so because of weaknesses in their third-party and supply chain vendor ecosystem. Now, all of that above really, it represents both technical and human vulnerabilities. So I had mentioned earlier, when we're talking about digital transformation, we're talking about the end of the day business being conducted over the internet. And with that business being conducted over the internet, the digital identity of all of your employees and all of your suppliers and their employees, et cetera, become a possible vulnerability, because it's not just about how they're interacting in the business transaction of your organization, but also oftentimes in their personal transactions and their own relationship with the internet. And that's very much why we're here today, is to talk about that whole concept of, okay, the digital identity as an asset in the security management portfolio construct. So I'm going to hand it over to Ashley and let you take it from here, Ashley.
The internet is a threat vector that we just can't simply ignore anymore. In the early 2000s, being safe online consisted of, not going into chat rooms. And if you were going into chat rooms, not saying that I lived on 123 Main Street and hi, my name is Ashley Brady and here is my phone number. If you didn't give out that information, then you were pretty much safe online. But things have changed significantly since then. About 10 years ago, businesses were standing up firewalls and saying, we're protected. As long as our network is protected, everything is okay. But again, there's been such a shift even from then, where just because you stand up firewalls, you're not stopping people from publishing sensitive IP information. You're not stopping a vendor from getting hacked. So currently we're challenged with the mix of both a human and technical component that's being mixed into what is on the internet and what threats are available on the internet. Particularly in the past 2 years with the pandemic, there's been such a great shift in the way that employees and businesses are interacting with the internet. Networking is now being conducted online. We're hosting conferences online. Even this webinar, these are happening with such a frequency they weren't happening before, that we're constantly giving information and exposing people, virtually in ways that we hadn't previously prepared for. There's very little separation anymore between corporate and personal, particularly with working from home. You probably have, personal apps running on your computer or personal things running on your network, understandably so. So there's things that we need to consider as business and risk professionals that weren't even something we had to consider previously. And because there's such an intersection of the personal and the corporate information, it makes it very easy to connect the dots. Just because you haven't posted anywhere that you're working for Media Sonar or iThreat, if you post enough personal information, we can very clearly connect the dots of, and establish that sort of profile about you. So the main thing I want you to take away from here is the reliance on the internet, both personally and professionally, has exposed us to risks in ways that businesses we hadn't had to consider before. So the internet's threatening, and there's more information out there than I think a lot of people have considered previously. So what's out there? The information pretty much runs the gamut. When we conduct digital risk profiles, we really narrow in with our clients as to what is important to you, what data are you looking for, what data do you want to protect, because you can find out pretty much anything and everything you want to on someone on the internet. Personally, there's the exposure of email addresses, passwords, home addresses, phone numbers, technical detail. I can go on for an hour droning on about just the information personally that's available to you out there. But corporately, HR information people can use to kind of threaten companies in ways that we hadn't considered. Vendor information, when someone posts that, they're a vendor of Coca-Cola or things like that, big threats can be, threat actors can target these sort of vendors. So these are all things that are out there that a threat actor can use to establish an overall profile of a company or a person. So I'm telling you this amount, there's all this information out there, and you're probably thinking, okay, yeah, sure. But I Googled my company and I Googled myself, and I'm fine. I don't see anything out there. So there must not be any threats out there on me. Unfortunately, not all threats exist just on Google. Not to say that there's not an importance in managing your, the indexed information that's out there, but the estimates are that only about 4% of the internet is on that surface web, what Google, Bing, the others are indexing every day. So when you search Ashley Brady, very little information is probably going to come up that you can use to enumerate. Excuse me. Whereas a lot more information is on what we call the deep and the dark web. The dark web is the Silk Road, the Dot Onion, the Tor, but the deep web is even bigger. That's where we estimate about 90% of the internet is. These are the specialty forums, the public records, the things that you need a login to be able to post or see. Those are the sort of things that Google can't get into. And this is where we find a lot of the threats exist on the internet. For example, there's a lot of industry forums where people will go and talk about, negative things about their company or post sensitive information about their company. And companies aren't even aware of this because unless they know that those forums exist, there's no way for them to monitor that sort of information. There's a lot of information just hiding in plain sight, but you need to know where to look for it. And these are the sort of things that you, as a risk professional, need to understand when you're starting to establish and perform digital risk assessments for a company. So now you know that there's a ton of information out there. You know that it exists in all these different places. So what do you do about it? Well, this is where professionals like us come in and we help clients do this. But it's certainly something that any security professional can work with and try to help their company with. The most important thing is you need to identify your critical business assets. You cannot monitor for any and everything. You can't say we're going to monitor for every single employee. We're going to monitor their entire online presence because that's just impossible. The internet has so much information. There's only so much you can monitor for. So you need to, as a business, decide what is the most important and critical assets in your business. What is your company's core goal or service? If you're a service company, that your humans or your employees are your asset, then those are the people or asset that you need to protect. Versus if you're a software company, the intellectual property, any of that sort of stuff that goes along with having a software would be something that you would be considered about when you're identifying a critical business asset that you want to protect from these online threats. So now you understand what your threats are, but why are we monitoring for these things? Well, if you want to monitor for like leaks of intellectual property, you're going to look in certain places. And if you want to monitor for email addresses for humans, you're going to look in other places. And you need to understand why and how you're going to go about that. So once you've established your assets and you understand where those threats are coming from, again, that's completely dependent on the assets that in question. For email addresses, you may want to consider, phishing campaigns. If someone gets a hold of your company's email address database, they can start phishing campaigns and say like, hey, send me an Amazon gift card, which you would think doesn't work, but it works more often than we would like to admit. Exposure of financial details can leave you open to fraud. So you have to understand what the assets are and where you want to look for them. Once you've already established that, then you need to know where you're going to monitor for. A lot of what we do as part of iThreat is we work with the clients once they've established their business assets and things they want to monitor for, of establishing a baseline of what's out there. We want to know what's out there on our executives, so we'll perform an assessment that'll say, you can find your executives' personal information here, here, and here, and then we monitor for exposure. So once you have that baseline, you can see if anything has changed from that baseline. Where you monitor, again, is completely dependent on what you're monitoring for. If you're monitoring for, intellectual property, you're going to try to find specific forums, specific sites, specific places that people are talking about or potentially leaking that sort of information. If you're monitoring for email addresses, it might be a dark web thing where people are doxing other people that you might want to monitor for. Once you are monitoring and you find something, what do you do about it? Well, you have to mitigate or remediate in that case. Mitigation would be, seeing if you can take it down. There's a large amount of offending content on, social media sites, so they have very straightforward processes for reporting abuse in this. You can also report to ISPs. You can send legal notices and the like. Ultimately, when you're starting to perform these digital risk assessments, there's so much information that's out there. You really need to hone in on what's important to your business and work on developing both proactive and reactive processes to handling these threats. Proactive in addressing what's already out there, if you find it, taking it down, and then reactive by efficiently handling anything new, any new leaks, new exposures through established processes. Otherwise, when something happens, you don't want to be caught with your pants down and running around. What do I do about it? You already have those processes in place. So now, yes, it stinks that something was leaked, but this is what we're going to do about it. We're going to make it as pain-free as possible.
Oh, I'm gonna jump in here. Thank you again, Ashley, for that. You made a lot of great points. I'm gonna springboard over what I talk about here. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking about a value of this data and maximizing the time to that value. Okay, so let's talk about value, just a simple way of sort of conceptualizing this. Okay, so talk about the internet. If I take it at the highest level, right? The average person, we see the internet is a major benefit to our day-to-day lives, right? It's ease of access to information. We can achieve things, day-to-day tasks much easier, right? So for all the same conveniences that someone might buy a purse from Gucci, or a group of people plans a Sunday picnic on Facebook in some Facebook group, these exact same conveniences and ease of access of information and services is the exact same thing that, if we talk about the delineation between good guys and bad guys, it's the same conveniences bad guys are actually using to conduct their day-to-day operations. And that's much different than, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago, okay, where things needed to be a little bit more clandestine in a non-accessible way, right? So that leads us to some problems. We know that we, in an industry right now, security, we are looking at more proactive sort of intelligence trends. We're sort of getting out of that mindset of only, of only worrying about the inside the wire sort of deal, right? So yes, we've got hardened appliances. Yes, we've got all of our security in place for our four walls. We have our email security systems, et cetera, et cetera. But it's about predicting the next thing rather than trying to cure the problem that becomes an emergent situation on next Tuesday, right? So leads us to some problems though. At the end of the day, okay, and not to put this simplistically or anything, we are talking about a massive data set. Okay, I know, if I liken it to cybersecurity folks, like they understand that, the data sets that they deal with are already massive, right? We've got these topics of things like alert fatigue and et cetera, throughout the security industry. When we talk about web data, I cannot emphasize enough just the exponential growth in potential data set. Okay, I put it up there on astronomical scales. Okay, our human brains aren't truly designed, like built to understand the concepts of how much data gets created on a day-to-day basis. We see the numbers, we read them, but I don't think we truly have a good handle on that. So first and foremost is this wall of data. How do we access this data? How do we sift through it? How do we make it actionable, right? In an industry where we're already used to dealing with a lot of data, so we're just piling more on top. And that leads us to where those problems come from. I mean, across the security, I don't care if you're a physical security guy, you're someone working in digital security, you're working in threat intelligence somewhere, even just brand protection. Okay, there are some very common issues or limitations in our industry, and it comes back to that good guy, bad guy thing, right? Like, as good guys, there's never enough money, there's never enough time, and there's never enough people to stop all the things the bad guys are able to do these days, right? We're up against a very stressful and daunting sort of task, right? On a day-to-day basis, we have to win every single time with the resources we have, which, bad guys only need to win that once to make our day a bad day, right? So we have to take these limitations into account. Both of these things, the massive data set and the physical realities of our industry, it can be very overwhelming, right? But that is not to say we just abandon the mission, okay? And I think, you know, any practitioners that are watching this right now, the day-to-day sort of feeling is the bosses come by and say, hey, we need to look at this, and we have to, you know, as the teams, we have to figure out how we do that with the tools we have on hand, the expertise and skills and people that we have available to in our bandwidth, right? So anything that can help supplement the eyes, brains, ears, efforts, skill sets of a human is very welcomed. Okay, so you know, on the slide I've got automation. I generally hate buzzwords like automation, but it is very true. Anything that can help do a task for us, right? So we don't have to fall into the security industry traps of over investing into hiring or tooling or redundant systems, all that fun stuff that will fall apart later, as we generally find in our budgets. We need to find the ways to do things effectively now. Okay. Which would lead me to, I'll talk a little bit shamelessly about Media Sonar and more so some of the concepts within a platform like Media Sonar. Okay, so I started off by scaring the bejesus out of everybody, telling us that we're talking about a data set that's massive. Okay, so within that data set, we're not reinventing any wheels. Okay, so really in security, nothing is a reinvention, it's just a modification. Okay, so we could all sit on Google all day, like Ashley proposed or suggested, and we could search our name, right? That's a manual process. As we heard from Ashley, it's not even an effective scope of a manual process if we're just going to sit on Google. But all of these things can be replicated by human efforts. But the problem is we don't have that. We don't have the bandwidth in that effort. Okay, so first and foremost is we're talking, when I say web data, okay, that can include anything from previously mentioned stuff like true dark web nodes, things like the deep web, things like surface web, and yes, these are all buzzwords or big label classifications, right? But really, what I'm talking about is all the things that Google can find, Google can't find, and need to be on a separate network. And each one of those sort of avenues have their own sort of nuances to how much content are on them, right? So I mean, something as simple as saying, yeah, deep web. Well, there's platforms like Telegram, Gab, whatever. These are all interesting places, and they're all vectors for creating content and adding to that data set. So we need a way to pull all of those things into one place. Okay, so web intelligence and investigation platforms like Media Sonar, give a sort of under one pane of glass, one hood, access to all of these streams of content, and that's fine. Having access is great, but the next step is how do we ask questions of that data as security practitioners? What are we looking for? How are we finding it? Right. So it's about providing avenues to build smart queries, ways of collecting, detecting, and alerting on potential security threats as defined by an individual organization and their individual security sort of mission, right? Whether it be close protection or executive security, or whether it be cybersecurity, things like that. Obviously, we're in a team sport, okay? Security very rarely is a lone wolf sort of game. So obviously, low-hanging fruit stuff, a great web intelligence platform. We have this in there, not to boast, but things like workspace collaboration, the ability to do a shared investigation, to be able to not duplicate work. Again, it's about eliminating those redundancies. And from that collaboration, obviously, we want to see products of an investigation and detections, right? So the ability to alert on things that concern you. So again, we're trying to save time so that you don't have to be in front of a tool to be aware of what's going on in your landscape, right? The ability to track an investigation. Okay, so yes, it's great that I found something, but from that, as any good security practitioner, whether it's physical or digital, we want to learn the whys and the whos about some of these potential threats coming down the pipeline. So again, we can get awareness, but we can also plan future actions to mitigate some of these things as they come. So the ability to visualize some of this data, right, in a more meaningful way than just looking at a tweet. Right. So the elements of things like using natural language processing and machine learning to extract what we call in our world entities or data points that are interesting to most practitioners. So, a threat comes through email. An interesting point might be a name or an email address that's associated with that. Right. Because we might want to follow that breadcrumb down the rabbit hole. And the other big one, okay, is in our world is scalability. right? There's, it's on paper, it sounds great to be able to add another layer of intelligence or security processes to our security landscape on a day-to-day basis. Again, I made that joke that we hear that concept and we just have to make it work as the good guys. Well, scalability comes into play, right? It's fine to say, hey, I searched this one tweet, right? And that's all you did. And that's, in a manual context, a lot of its own work to some degree. But what if you had 17 threats? What if you had 100? What if you're what if you're a managed security service provider and you've got 100 different clients with all of their own threats on their landscape or all their own assets they want to protect, right? So there has to be built in a way for that platform, that technology to scale with your day-to-day practical sort of tactical needs in your security posture, right? So things like the ability to have unlimited access to this information, right? Like no credit systems or whatnot, the ability to modify, to experiment with queries, to experiment with sort of intelligence missions within a platform, the ability to then push things like alerts to other security tools, right, through API connections and whatnot. So again, it's not about adding redundant different panes of glass for just different nuances. It's where can we marry this data to make it even more effective and more of that scenario of all of our tools are playing well with each other kind of deal. Again, with the ultimate goal of we know there's value in this information, and it's about piercing that wall of feeling overwhelmed, right? The mountain of data that we have to look through, and truly there's lots of interesting things on the internet. So it's not looking for a needle in a haystack, okay? It's looking for needle, like a very particular needle and stack of needles often, right? So it's about finding efficient ways to do that. And again, it's about supplementing the human efforts, right? So the ability to save things, alert on things, visualize the things that we find, and the ability to collaborate and transfer that knowledge to our teammates so we can best be prepared to avoid the things coming down the pipe rather than dealing with the issue as it emerges as a real event.
Thanks, Rob. So we're wrapping up here, and I think one of the things that I noticed certainly in the poll response is that it's not lost on anybody the importance of digital identity and managing digital risk profiles from a security perspective. The whole proliferation of digital identities across the internet is definitely a growing risk for business. And the concept of the human asset, or us as people and our respective digital identities, we're an important intersect of the internet's relationship with the enterprise. So it's truly an emerging requirement to be incorporated in the kind of the security asset management portfolio lens. And without a doubt, the whole concept of resources, whether it's because of skills gap or human resource shortages, the dollars that are available and the complexity of addressing this, it's a tug of war, and really can only be addressed with automation. Now, we've wrapped up what we wanted to share. Definitely want to encourage anybody who is on with us to put any questions they have in the chat, and we'll take a moment to answer them. You have some expertise, definitely some domain expertise in both Rob and Ashley to ask some questions. So really want to open the floor. So we'll give it a moment and see if there's any questions that anybody wants to pose out there, or just insights, even from their own lens. Okay, here's one. So a question that actually just came in. So if we haven't started using this information yet, what would you suggest be one of the first ways to start, and how long does it take to kind of get something like this up and running? I don't know if Rob or Ashley, you want to take a crack at that, just in terms of your own kind of startup insight?
Sure. Yeah, it really depends on whether or not this is something you're looking to do in-house, or if you're looking to hire a vendor to do this. Certainly, if you're hiring a vendor or, getting a tool like Media Sonar, you can get up and running pretty quickly once you've already established what you're monitoring for, what's important to your organization. And again, if you don't know what's important, I look at what does your business do? Are you selling a service? Is it a human related business? And using that sort of information to establish what you need to protect as a business, where your potential threats are coming from. If you're doing it internally, once you've established those threats, it can take several months for you to get that sort of baseline of what's out there, assuming you're knowing where to look. And after that, the monitoring, using tools like Media Sonar or using services like us really help you kind of get that real-time information of when those potential threats come out there.
Okay, thank you for that, Ashley. Rob, do you have anything you want to add?
I'll just add a little bit of color. That was great, Ashley. I mean, my only thing I'll say is, hinge on what Ashley just said there. It's a really important choice in my experience, that in-house versus third-party or tooling option. Both have different strategies. I'll be honest, going the third-party or tooling way is a quicker, it's faster to start. Okay, you don't need to know a lot of philosophical, sort of very technical expertise-based techniques and theories and whatnot for OSINT collection that way, right? A lot of these things are built into tools. It's, again, I ranted about this. We're not trying to reinvent wheels. We're trying to make things easier for people. If you choose to go the internal route, because you guys haven't even explored this concept of this form of intelligence before, I would behoove everybody to make friends with an actual seasoned practitioner of OSINT. They're their own special breed in security, because again, it's about avoiding the pains of relearning some of these hard fought lessons over the last 10-15 years in that sort of segment of the industry, or just avoid that altogether. Go with an advanced tool. Again, it skips a lot of those learnings and it lets you quite literally sort of out of the box get things moving a lot quicker without understanding some of the fundamental philosophies behind it.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So here's another one. What are the most common types of digital threats that you typically help your clients deal with? I probably might pose that first to you, Ashley.
Oh, guys, this is a tough question because we get so much different types of things. I would say that the greatest threat for a majority of our clients is intellectual property, and managing the interaction between that, because most of the property is not tangible. So where you're putting it, you're trusting it somewhere, whether it's on a server or with a human. So having to manage all those different aspects of that intellectual property threat is probably the greatest or most frequent thing that we manage. But also just the availability of personal information, particularly for executives. I can't tell you how many times we've had an executive be like, they have my password, they've hacked my computer. Well, no, unfortunately, you've just been a victim of a breach and I can go look that up in some database. So the exposure of personal information is out there if you know where to look. And it's alarming if you don't know that it's out there. So we get a lot of that as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great. I don't think we have any more questions. Okay, I think we're good. So listen, thanks again. Please pass along to your colleagues. We'd love to see more people taking a look and being part of this. Thanks very much.